Professor Michael Abbott is a Wabash alumnus, class of 1985, and chair of the theater department. He received his graduate degree from Columbia University and taught at Marquette University for 5 years before returning to teach at Wabash in 1994. In 2001, he was awarded Wabash's McLean McTurnan Arnold Award for Excellence in Teaching. Professor Abbott also writes the Brainy Gamer blog, one of the most highly regarded websites devoted to games in the world. With a chapel talk entitled, Off the Table, Professor Michael Abbott.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Jake and Samer and the Sphinx Club for inviting me to speak here this morning. This is my first chapel talk, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I want to thank you, my colleagues, and all of you students who took the time out of your schedules to come to hear me speak today. I really appreciate it. It's a privilege for me to be here today. As many of you know, my wife is a rhetoric professor, so I really need to make sure I don't screw this up. In deference to her expertise, I will say that this will be a persuasive speech with ceremonial and confessional elements, presented with a manuscript delivery. I'm hoping for an A, but I will happily settle for a B if accompanied by one-on-one remedial instruction from my professor. I thought you'd get that. I was especially happy when Samer contacted me about speaking and asked me if I had any preferences on dates. I chose this particular date because it has special significance to me. 30 years ago, this week, I arrived on Wabash's campus as a high school senior for my first solo visit. It was a Monday. I remember it vividly. A few months earlier, I had visited Wabash for the first time as a finalist for the Lilly Scholarship competition. I was in a theater production back home at that time, so I recall blasting through that visit and racing home just in time to throw on my costume and make my first entrance. It wasn't the best way to visit Wabash. I didn't have time to meet many students or visit classes, and I left hungry to know more. I remember thinking, I'd like to make a movie here, because the campus looked like Hollywood's idea of the charming college that Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland would have attended. Maybe not Judy. So on the afternoon of March 30th, 1981, I arrived on campus for a 2-day visit by myself, eager to drink in the place and possibly even meet the affable but bumbling dean of students played in my mind by veteran character actor Thomas Mitchell. He played the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, the guy behind the screen, just so you know. I parked my car and I walked into an old white house that hosted the admissions staff at that time, ready to sign in and begin my campus tour. And the place was deserted. I looked around, didn't see anyone, so I walked out the door, crossed the street, entered another old white house to see if anyone could help me. Nobody. Confused, I decided to return to old White House number 1 and wait for somebody to show up. I lingered inside the door for a while, and then I heard somebody's voice coming from the back, inside a room on the other side of the house. So I walked over to it and I looked in. And there were half a dozen people or more huddled around a television screen. A woman looked up at me and said, "Oh, you must be Michael Abbott." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm sorry, I missed you when you came in. I have a folder for you." And she walked me to the front desk. Something about my expression must have clued her in, so she asked, "Have you not heard the news?" I said, "No." On my drive to Crawfordsville, the radio in my car, in all likelihood, was blaring an 8-track of Steely Dan. "Oh," she said, "President Reagan has been shot." Memory is a funny thing. I don't recall much that happened after that. I don't remember exactly which classes I visited or even where I spent the night, but I do remember that something about that incident and the way the people responded to it here convinced me that this was a real community. I recall one teacher, I'm pretty sure it was David Hadley, abandoning his lesson plan for that day and talking about the role that violence had played in American politics, how it tends to bring us together. Much later, we learned that Reagan had joked to the staff in the operating room, "I hope you're all Republicans," to which the lead surgeon, Joseph Giordano, a liberal Democrat, replied, "Today, Mr. President, we are all Republicans." I remember another thing about that day. I met the Dean of Students, Norman Moore, whom I would soon refer to along with every other Wabash student as Stormin' Norman, and who, by the way, could easily have been played by Thomas Mitchell. I remember asking him if the college would ever cancel classes when an event like this occurred. He looked at me with a soon-to-be familiar Stormin' Norman smirk and said, "Why would we do that? This is a moment for reflection. You will discover, Mr. Abbott, that we scrutinize everything under the sun here. That's our business, and you will make it yours too if you decide to join us." Well, that was that. I would be a Wabash man. I've never forgotten that conversation, nor the way Norman Moore used to say, "Scrutinize." Dean Moore's promise was borne out by my experience here as a student. My professors, Warren Rosenberg, Dwight Watson, Jim Fisher, Doug Kalish, David Hadley, Toby Herzog, all but one still here 30 years later, fed my appetite for learning. But more importantly, they instilled in me an ideal for self-reflection. They urged me to interrogate my presumptions and beliefs. They pricked my 19-year-old small-town Indiana sensibilities, a kind of naive certainty homespun as Midwestern common sense. And they made that young man a kind of dubious dinner guest, welcome at their table, entitled to fully partake in the plenty, but a little suspect. They fed me full, but they insisted that I examine every bite and try every dish, even the ones I disliked. And before I could leave the table, they quizzed me on every taste, not so much to test me on what I'd learned, but to ensure that I had fully engaged, that I had opened my mind, and that the opinions I came to hold were earnestly wrought. In the end, to my surprise, I discovered that they didn't much care which dishes I liked or disliked, nor did they have much stake in convincing me I was right or wrong about anything, except Rosenberg. What they wanted to teach me at that table was how to taste my own food, how to develop my own palate, formed by my own experience, driven by inquiry. I suppose you could say that my Wabash education could be summed up in a single sentence: chew your food. Today, we're not doing that as well as we should here. And that's what I've come to talk to you about this morning. I'm going to say some hard things now, and I hope you will open your hearts and minds and give me a chance to fully bake this dish I've prepared today. If you do, I promise to treat you with respect, and I promise to use no more food metaphors. The course of my career at Wabash changed on a certain day some years ago, well before any of you students were here. I was in a faculty meeting, and Andy Ford, who was our president at that time, was speaking to us about our mission statement: long-range planning and a capital campaign, things college presidents must think about. I raised my hand, and I asked if the issue of coeducation would be raised as part of our deliberations on the future of the college. He replied, "That issue is off the table." And so ended all deliberation on Wabash as a single-sex institution. I know what some of you are thinking. Andy Ford rocks. The protector of the realm, the upholder of Wabash's core identity as an all-male college. I understand that reaction. I'm fully aware, as is anyone who spends more than 20 minutes on this campus, that most of you hold our status as an all-male college precious. The words Wabash should go co-ed are fighting words around here. And as we know, Wabash always fights. I want you to understand why that day, in that faculty meeting, was the most troubling day of my career at Wabash. What President Ford said that day wasn't just that Wabash would remain a single-sex institution. What he said was that we would not talk about it. In the broad consideration of Wabash's values, curriculum, and mission as a liberal arts college, the choice to remain all-male would not be discussed or evaluated. In that moment, we separated the single most distinguishing feature of Wabash College from all considerations of its future. Why, when presented with an opportunity to earnestly study and weigh the advantages and drawbacks of coeducation at Wabash College, why did we shrink from that opportunity? Why did we not see it as more than an opportunity, but as an obligation? If we cannot articulate the reasons why remaining all-male clearly outweigh going co-ed, what justification do we have to remain all-male? Some of you may mistake my remarks as a call for Wabash to go co-ed. That is not my goal here. I'm speaking about coeducation to you today because I believe we have institutionalized a silencing of dissent on the issue. We just don't talk about it. Worse and more troubling, I believe we've fostered a love it or leave it culture at Wabash that deflects genuine intellectual engagement on this issue and induces us into a kind of celebratory navel-gazing that precludes real self-examination. Wabash, we assure ourselves, is the greatest place on earth because if it isn't, our single-sex status may be called to question. Is our superiority to all other schools so self-evident that we needn't actually scrutinize our identity or our definition of ourselves? We live here with a kind of bunker mentality, always on the defensive, translating any effort to seriously discuss coeducation as disloyal and anti-Wabash. This is a dangerous path, gentlemen. If we wish to make sense of our decision to remain a college for men, and make no mistake, we reaffirm that decision every day we teach and learn here. We need more defined and compelling arguments than the only two I have heard for 30 years. One, women are a distraction, and two, tradition. I'm purposely not going to address the women are a distraction argument because, frankly, it's stupid and insulting. Aside from the implication that the only possible contribution a woman might make in the Wabash classroom would be to make you lose your focus, the argument also lacks any substantive data to back it up. I taught for 5 years at a co-ed university with a liberal arts curriculum, and I can tell you that the men in my classroom were no less prepared and performed no less admirably than my students here. To suggest that we educate you better here because we're all male smacks of arrogance and a little desperation. The case we must make isn't about doing it better. It's about doing it differently. And where we've fallen down, in my view, is making the case for what that difference means and why it matters. Male bonding is a valuable outcome, and I don't mean to diminish it. But we are an institution of higher learning. I need to hitch my wagon as an educator to something more compelling than that. If Wabash wants to be a college for men, then let's make sure we know why the other option isn't better by actually considering it. We should not fear this. Gentlemen, I give you my word as a brother and as an alumnus who loves this college not an iota less than you. I am not here on a secret mission. There is no conspiracy to take Wabash co-ed. My faculty colleagues on the left and right do not discuss it. President Ford took the issue off the table, and there it has stayed. All I'm saying today is that by keeping it off the table, we negate the very principles of intellectual debate and academic inquiry that we say we hold dear. I want to say a few words about tradition. It's easy to mock or dismiss tradition, especially if you're an outsider to a culture that practices its traditions out in the open. That's how we do it here. We're proud of our traditions, even the goofy ones. Our homecoming queen parade has roots in satyr plays dating back to the Greeks. It's a ridiculous display, and we like it that way. Sometimes we don't understand the true nature of a tradition until we take the time to study it carefully or examine alternatives. I was one of those who thought the old version of chapel sing was an abomination. The wild, unruly spectacle of shaved-headed men screaming their lungs out, while Sphinx Club distractors held up pictures of naked women and poured Tabasco sauce on crackers crammed into the mouths of freshmen who defiantly devoured them. It was quite a show. I thought the public spectacle made us look like Neanderthals. After this version of chapel sing hit its zenith, the administration stepped in and effectively put an end to it. Reasonable concerns were expressed about the health and safety of our students and their vocal cords. And Chapel 2.0 was instituted. If you have a richer sense of Wabash history, you know that we're really talking about Chapel Sing 20.0. There is no single definitive version of the event. It's changed many times throughout the years. As Woody Allen famously said, tradition is the illusion of permanence. But something went wrong on the way to the new version of Chapel Sing. We neutered it. We made it safe. We gave it structure. When I saw the new version of Chapel Sing, I began to realize what we had lost from the previous version. If I had taken the time to properly understand what that primitive, even slightly primal edition of the event was all about, I might have voiced opposition to the change. All I could see were the ways it had grown out of control. What I didn't fully appreciate was why it needed to be a little dangerous and even a little violent. When one of my students said to me, they killed it, Professor. Chapel Sing is dead, I understood what he meant. I'll bet if we had scrutinized it more carefully, discussed it with everyone's point of view at the table, we might have come up with a less severely extreme version of Chapel Sing, but one that retained its ecstatic Dionysian spirit. We hold it dear at Wabash, but I'm suggesting to you today that tradition is a neutral thing. It's inherently neither good nor bad. Tradition can be employed to uphold the highest community standards, or it can be used to justify racism and social injustice. If you appreciate the argument that says we do it this way because that's how we've always done it, then you must also understand the risks of that argument. Cultural tradition was the main defense waged against the integration of our public schools. It was the primary rationale behind the preservation of slavery and the continuing denial of rights to homosexuals. Study the speeches of Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot. You will find them littered with appeals to our way of life and our traditional national values. Tradition has bloody hands, but tradition also gives us Mardi Gras and the seventh inning stretch. What to make of tradition? What to make of tradition? I suggest you celebrate tradition when that seems right to you, but don't rely on it as an inarguable defense. The problem with tradition as a claim is that it shuts down inquiry or discussion. It is so because that's the way we do it, just doesn't fly when someone poses a thoughtful challenge that merits a thoughtful response. At its worst, tradition is a dodge, a calculated roadblock that prevents us from carefully examining something we really don't want to look at, like hazing. That's right, I'm going to talk about hazing. Hazing. There's a Wabash tradition, and a thriving one. Are we prepared to talk about that? If not, why not? How certain are we that these hazing activities, officially forbidden but routinely overlooked by the college, how certain are we that these activities are by definition ugly and mean-spirited? Can a case be made for hazing? And if so, what is that case? Gentlemen, you are not fools. You do things for reasons. What are the reasons? Make the case. I know what you're thinking. It's the first rule of Fight Club. Everybody is better off if we don't talk about it. What a shameful situation. There's something terribly wrong-headed about publicly prohibiting behaviors and then willfully ignoring them when they occur. Under such conditions, can our students be blamed for keeping hazing in the shadows? What else should they be expected to do? Wabash faculty and administrators, what can our students teach us about why hazing matters to so many of them? What can we teach them about why it's so problematic for us? Hazing, some of it extreme, is Wabash's dirty little secret. How can we work together and find a place where we can all live in the light? It can only begin if we're willing to talk about it. When we take thorny issues off the table, and I'm talking this morning about fundamental issues that define who we are and what we value, when we take those issues off the table, we deny ourselves the opportunity to interrogate them, and that's what we're built to do. It's how we know what we know. It's the difference between believing in your bones and believing what you're told to believe. I can imagine a Wabash with a faculty, student body, and alumni base galvanized around the idea of our mission as a college that chooses to educate men. We get to that place by articulating a shared vision of why we made that choice. We get there by conveying that vision through our curriculum. We get there by recruiting young men with diverse backgrounds and views to continue that process of inquiry and renewal. Because being a college for men can't be a choice we made once upon a time based on a ridiculous notion that women aren't fit to educate. It's a choice we make every day because it's the right choice for us. But it must be a choice. Wabash, put it back on the table. Thank you.
Some announcements. Tonight is the Panhandle Tug of War at 7 o'clock. Tomorrow, the bed races will be on the mall. Cooking and the events will start around 4 o'clock. Please, if you value your car, have it off the mall by 3:45. For the Lupe Fiasco concert following the bed races, all Wabash students must present a Wabash ID at the door to receive your ticket. Saturday, track is at the Indiana Intercollegiates, tennis is at the GLAC tournament, golf is at the DePaul Golf Classic, baseball plays Allegheny, and then on Sunday, baseball plays Hiram. Please stand and sing Old Wabash. On the hills of Maine to the western plains.